Hello, everybody. Hello, hello. It's very nice to see you all in here. Some very dedicated viewers tonight. Thank you for sitting on the waiting screen for so long, some of you. Wow. Hello. Welcome to Conversations with Authors. Today we bring to you two speakers. First is A Slight Thing, Happiness by Joan Baranow, and Disorder by Amy Crider. But before we get to our speakers properly, please allow me to welcome you to Book Passage's Conversations with Authors. If you've seen one of these events before, well then, welcome back. We're glad to have you back. But if you're new here, then Book Passage is an independently run bookstore out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and we host and run book talks just like these very often throughout the week, both in person in our Corte Madera store and in our San Francisco store, but also, as you may have gathered, live here online on YouTube. And we will continue doing these into the future. This is completely free. And honestly, really helps us out if you watch. So please, if you can, click the subscribe button just below the video. And as an added bonus, if you click the little bell just next to the subscribe button, you'll be alerted every time that we go live with one of these talks, so you don't have to miss out on something you otherwise might have really enjoyed. If you'd like to check out our upcoming events, or just like the idea of receiving an email newsletter, you can find both of those at bookpassage.com. And if you would like to purchase either of our speakers' books tonight, you can find them using the links in the description below, or of course at bookpassage.com. Lastly, and this one's very important, if you have any questions for our speakers tonight, please take the time to write them in the YouTube chat. You can write them as early as you want, as you think of them, and I will pass them along to the speakers when the time is right. So don't worry about interrupting. Very good. Now allow me to introduce to you, first up, Joan Baranow. Who's the author of In the Next Life, Living Apart, and two poetry chapbooks. Her collection, Reading Szymborska, ooh, good try, in a Time of Plague, won the 2021 Brick Road Poetry Book Contest. A fellow of the Virginia Center for Creative Arts and a member of the community of writers, she founded and teaches in the low residency MFA program in creative writing at Dominican University of California. With her husband, David Watts, she produced the PBS documentary Healing Words, Poetry, and Medicine. Her featured-length documentary, The Time We Have, presents an intimate portrait of a teenager facing terminal illness. Also, with us tonight, we have Amy Crider, who is an award-winning novelist and playwright based in Chicago. She studied theater and education at Goddard College and began her playwriting career with the writing program at the famed Comedy Center, Second City. In 2021, she won the Tennessee Williams one-act play contest. Her first novel, Disorder, again, which is what we're featuring here tonight, was published in 2021 when she was 60, after it won the University of New Orleans Press Lab Prize. She produces a podcast of audio versions of her plays called Continuous Dream Theater, which you can find at www.continuousstream.com. We are so excited to have the both of them here with us tonight. Please welcome to the show, Joan and Amy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, especially with my sister, Amy. This is going to be really fun tonight. I want to thank Book Passage for hosting us, and to thank Nick and Zach and Kay, who all worked to put this together. Also to our family and friends who are beaming in from somewhere. I know you're out there, so we can't see you, but we're very happy that you're here. I also want to give a shout out to the woman, my friend, Victoria Chabin, who did the cover art of for my book. And I think it's just absolutely gorgeous. And it's called Murmurations, and it's a detail from one of her paintings. So this book, I'd written these poems over a number of years, and then I realized that they cohered together under a theme of family, and specifically motherhood. So the book starts with the dream of becoming pregnant, and then continues through birth and having children, but also includes relationship with parents, grandparents. And so I think it's a book that I think anyone would enjoy and relate to. So I'm going to start with the first poem in the book. And it's the poem of basically the dream of becoming pregnant. It's called That Summer. Cobalt rust, a heave of fog sliding across the sand. Fog in the manzanita. A flower like goldenrod put forth its yellow pearls. We posed nearby where the wooden steps left the parking lot. The camera lens kept the edges in, ocean, cliffs. A coastal summer before the baby had being. The seeds inside the shrubbery were neutral. Coyote mint whose scent drifted and disappeared like foam. We stood on the deck with the telescope's 25-cent view of sunlit Pacific, a boy leaping the trails. I thought the same as anyone. The world flowers, even the lizard panting in the dust, flowers. So then pregnancy, which brought a number of unexpected complications, including preeclampsia. And so this is a poem, Toxemia Pregnancy. I should say that both of my sons are absolutely fine, wonderful, grown men now. But the beginning was a bit dicey. So this is called Toxemia Pregnancy. There was the bed bent in half, the needle in the wrist, the crack of bathroom light under the door. Your father tried to sleep in the hospital cot while the nurse came in every hour to watch your heartbeat scratch itself on ticker tape. 7 months inside me, you must have liked the sugary IV, for never had you leapt so much as if to say, okay, let me out. I lay in a body whose cells had blown apart and watched the clock move towards 8 when the surgeon would come lift you feet first into air-conditioned light. I tried to imagine how your world would open onto this, and even then I did not know what this would be. It was later, when you lay breathing hard, like an animal thrown by a car, that I knew what I'd done to you, though you were the big boy among the mouse-sized children who would also someday go home. Each night after all day in the NICU, the imprint of alarm bells kept ringing, and I'd see that deep pit in your chest gasping fast. On the third day, when I first held you, you seemed a little surprised, and you slept in the fragrance of my skin. Little one, sweetest pea, I crooned, too new for mothering to sing any of the songs I had rehearsed. How we all love beginnings best. And there you were, learning to breathe. One of the things I like to do when I'm writing is to take a familiar folktale and retell it from a point of view that doesn't often get told. And one of the folktales that keeps speaking to me is Little Red Riding Hood. And the character that I keep imagining is that sick grandmother in bed with the sheets pulled up. And then there's her granddaughter coming with the basket of goodies. But my view of this grandmother, I think, is, I don't know why, I think of her as super tough. So this is called Grandma. She dreams of wolves, their dense aromatic fur, the red rash of their mouths. Day long she lies there, the woven covers drawn tight to her chin, watching nothing but light crawl along the walls. Once she had carried an axe. Once she had flayed the little doves so plentiful here, the specks of their eyes bright onyx gems. She chewed their tough sinews, boiled their bones. She washed, put up peppers, swept the oiled boards, kept all her needles in a cushioned box. Now she lies still with sickness, the stink of her sweat like a dump. And that weakling of a girl, miniature of her mother, creeping in, her cloak puddled on the floor, jabbing a spoon of tepid tea to her lips. Ghastly. But she's the ghost now, isn't she? Blasted, blown, her legs like twisted rags, her stomach a pale pit. Get up, her dream voice shouts. In dreams, she crowbars the bloated door and goes past the cracked lintel, her whole heft erect, no one's lullaby. Out there's where she finds them, encircling the house, her own rough pack sniffing the land, ears turned to the woman who's had enough, frail, naked, old. She takes a step, holds out her hand. So I'm going to read an elegy for our mother. And this is a persona poem. This is a poem that's written in the voice of my mother, the way I might hear her speaking to us who are still here. And it's called Settling. This is just the kind of cheap box I asked for years before my diagnosis. Not the plane crash I half joked about being the best way to die, but close enough. I see you chose something nice from my closet. I appreciate that. I just wish well, being buried here, not ideal, but I'd never have chosen among you children. What's it matter anyway? I'm gone. It's a quiet place. That's what I liked about this backwater village. I could sit on the roof of my house and smoke. If only Louise hadn't published a prayer for me in the local paper, I could have died without embarrassment. No one does, I guess. I mean, the shame of lying there, stiff, of being discovered, of being undressed and washed, or whatever it is they do to you before closing the lid. I'm sorry it happened the way it did, but I'm okay. The pine tree you picked to bury me under drops its needles in winter like a blanket. That's an image meant to tell you I'm tucked in, even though the cold can't touch me. There, my sweet Petunia, you're always too sensitive. Listen, if it helps to know, I'm scattered down here the way I like. See how the scrub grass grows so reliably over my grave. So on a lighter note, I'm going to read a poem. One thing about children is that when they are young, basically before they start school, they say the most wonderfully poetic things. And you just have to write them down and then steal them for your poems. And so this poem's called Things He Said. And there's lots of them. I only have this one poem that collected them, Things He Said. He said he'd run out of dream power. He said he'd see if I had any extra. He wanted to floor his room with sod to plant bamboo, and why couldn't he spread sod on the floor? He said he and his friends gathered together in a little herd. He said, if you get hurt, I'll kill you. He said, "Call me Black Eye." He said when Frankenstein was first made, he was a jolly soul. When his father said to watch out for those Paris Hilton types, he said, "So you have some experience with that?" He said, "Call me Inside the Rainbow." And I will read two more poems. This one provides the line for the title of the book, and the poem's called "Watching the Red Squirrels." We sat in the kind of heat the aged seek, 3 electric heaters burning at our feet, while outside the sun blazed the squirrel's strawberry tail. One leg with its delicate foot stuck straight up, like a child reaching too far into a bucket, only to tip and flip inside the cracked plastic feeder hanging by its chain. Your mother and aunt laughed. So did we. It was one of those afternoons that remains in memory, a slight thing, happiness. And I'm going to end with the last poem in the book, and it's called Blue Moon. The moon lingers below the horizon, sending a sheen up in advance, like an envoy shouting the queen's arrival. Only the moon's just a bony crone, like me, hooked to the earth by the same threads. And yet here I am in the car, watching its curved rim crowning over the ridge and sliding without effort into the sky. So thank you for listening. And I'm looking forward to hearing Amy read from her novel.
Thank you, Joan. And I will be reading from my novel Disorder, which is this book. And excuse me, this is a murder mystery, and it takes place at a small university in a very rural area of upstate New York, which is where I lived for many years. And it was inspired by my experience with bipolar disorder many years ago, 30 years ago. When I started to have symptoms, my manic episodes became increasingly paranoid, psychotic and paranoid. And I found myself thinking when I was lucid, which much of the time I was lucid, I found myself thinking it's a good thing I'm not involved in a murder investigation right now, or I'd really be in trouble. And so I knew I wanted to write that someday as a novel. And I worked on it for many years, and it was rejected for many years, almost 20 years, about 17 years that I pitched it to agents, and it was rejected until it won the contest, the University of New Orleans Press Lab Prize. And it was published, as our host said, when I was 60 at the end of last year. And so I'm going to read the opening first. And this novel has sort of a dual narration because I have the character telling the story years later. So there's sort of a dual narrator, the older voice telling the story, gliding into the younger, very insecure voice of who she was when she was younger. So it starts with her older but wiser sort of voice to begin. I am not an unreliable narrator. How reliable is anyone? We all see through our narrow windows. Madness bonds the world together, sticks people to their beliefs and to their fellow lunatics. Some of us are labeled, marked. To you, it is a hard line separating us, separating the crazy people from yourself, from your friends and family. You live in a cocoon, a soft nest that gives you ease, the silky, feathered belief that at least you and yours are sane, not like those people, not like me. Sometimes I'd like to slap you. Look around, listen. You're at your cousin's wedding. You find yourself chatting with someone who seems like a nice, normal woman, a reliable narrator. Her hair is freshly cut, her eyebrows well groomed. You're chatting about a recent mix-up, an amusing anecdote about a misunderstanding you had where autocorrect made you sound like an oxymoron. This woman, laughing over her champagne glass, says, Mercury is in retrograde. That's why. It causes miscommunication, lost keys, lost cell phones. Don't worry, it comes out of retrograde on the 18th. And she means it. Do you glance around and slowly back away? Does the hair on your arm prick a bit to be face to face with utter madness? That you're talking to a woman who believes a rock 48 million miles away caused her to lose her keys? No, you laugh and say, well, I'm a TARS. Nearby, your Uncle Ned is holding forth, the uncle with the 3 strands of comb over glued to his forehead with gel and sweat. He's always jolly good for a laugh. He and the cousins seem to be in the middle of an interesting conversation. You sidle over, hoping for a good punchline. He gulps his champagne in 2 swallows and declares that climate change is a Chinese hoax. Do the cousins' eyes dart to each other? Do they anxiously whisper about his dosage of Zyprexa or Seroquel? No, they nod vaguely and ask him about the trade war. Then Uncle Ned mentions that this morning he stumbled and almost hit his head on a pipe, but just missed it. He credits God for saving him from hitting his head, and everyone agrees, believing a loving God allows children to be gassed in Syria, but cares enough to spare Uncle Ned's red, bald forehead from a boo-boo. The next day, you're walking through a park, and ahead of you, a small running child trips and falls on his face. Rather than hold and comfort the crying boy, his father grabs him by the arm and proceeds to scream at him in a rage. Do you haul this man off to the psych ward where he belongs? No, you walk by, and you still think the world is sane. Now you're thinking, Wendy, you're being rather defensive. I didn't expect the screed. And if I'm so unreliable, would I know what you're thinking? Please don't mistake my passion for snark. It's just today I feel irked by this whole issue. It's been a long time. For years, I didn't have the confidence to defend myself, but it's been long enough now, and I'm old enough not to take any more BS from anyone. That's the crux of it. This story goes back 6 years. It starts the night I was looking in the mirror at the Hellman's party. I know, I'm not supposed to start a story with the cliche of looking in a mirror, but that's really what happened. I was exhausted and splashed some water on my face. And in the mirror, I looked unfamiliar. There was such a frightened look in my eyes, like I was a refugee. My eyes wide open, far apart like a prey animal's, guarding from the dangers of night. Voices echoed from the party in the living room, laughter among friends I didn't feel part of. A weird sensation crept over me, that I was there to be sacrificed. I tried to dismiss it and tell myself I hadn't slept, not to mention I'd had a concussion earlier that day. I tried to change my expression, but the haunted look in my eyes remained. When I dried my face, I was brought back to reality by streaks of mascara on the pristine white towel. I'd forgotten I'd put on a little makeup before leaving the house. Feeling like an idiot, I rinsed it off as best I could. This was a home with nice things, thick white towels and modern African art. And along with those streaks of mascara came the sensation that I didn't belong in a grown-up house. So the next day, Wendy realizes that her housemate hasn't seemed to have come home from this party. And she starts to get worried and is asking around about her. Her housemate is a painter, an artist student. And she decides to go to the home where the party was of the Hellmans to ask her professor, his name is Dr. Hellman, to ask his wife about Diana, the housemaid, and whether she had seen her at the party. I didn't know how long the Hellmans had lived there. I thought they'd been at the university a long time, but their house was new. It was large and multi-level. Hard to imagine how the rooms inside related to the walls and windows. It was stucco, a poor choice, already showing fine cracks, a harsh surface at odds with the rural landscape. It belonged in California. Instead of gleaming in the sun, the gray skies made it look dirty. Along the foundation was a ring of splashed mud, like the soiled hem of a white dress. A Japanese maple grew stunted by one corner, and the hemlock hedge should have been wrapped in burlap to protect it from the wind. The windside was drying into rusty twigs. I parked in the driveway and rang the bell. It seemed like a long wait in the cold air before the door opened. Jean Hellman was a trim, athletic woman with a neat gray bob. She was belting a camel hair coat over her black turtleneck, a blue silk scarf perfectly tucked into the coat. I felt conscious of her being neat and put together. Maybe it was the scarf glowing in the monochromatic winter light. Oh, Wendy. Hello, I was about to leave. What can I do for you? Her face looked slightly stressed at the unexpected visit. I coughed. I was wondering, this is probably stupid, but my roommate, Diana, well, it seems like she hasn't been home since the party. Jean looked at her watch. Diana, which Diana? Diana Surf. Jean ducked her head and lowered her eyes, suddenly looking tired. I think I've probably met her. What about her? She was at your party last night and she hasn't come home. No, she wasn't at the party. I'm sorry, but I think I knew everyone there. The wind picked up as we stood at the door. I was losing my nerve now, but tried again. I saw her when I went outside. I thought she was on the patio. Behind me, a car pulled up. Dr. Hellman parked his SUV at the side of the road because my car was in the middle of the driveway. He strode up to the door, looking exasperated but indulgent. Well, hello again. You're blocking me, he said. I'm sorry. I said I would ask Jean when I got home. I don't think she was there, Jean said. At least she never came inside, and it was so dark and cold out. I can't imagine why she would have been out there. She smiled with sympathy, as if sympathy were a solution. Of course you're worried. You should call some of her friends. I'm sure you'll find her. Dr. Hellman opened the door wider to go past Jean into the house, and Jean stepped out. You're blocking me too. Oh, you have a crack in your windshield. I hit a deer yesterday on my way home. Jean stopped and looked more concerned. She was a biology teacher who taught pre-med. On your way home from the party? No, on my way home from Ohio before the party. Guess I hit my head. Jean looked at me, her eyes searching my forehead. Wendy, you should go get an x-ray. You probably have a concussion. Take care of yourself. At the time, I was touched. My family was not the type to worry or show concern, and her attitude brought warmth to my cheeks. Now, all these years later, I think she was also trying to dismiss me as she came down the step, walking me to my car, but certainly hurrying me along my way. Once home, I looked in Diana's room, still the suitcase, the oil painting with its creepy, smeared out face. It was 1 o'clock. I decided to try calling her cell. Though it seems crazy, I didn't have my own cell yet in 2007, and I called from the living room landline. In the empty house, the air swirling with drafts, a loud ringing made me jump. It was her cell in the bedroom, the mournful echo of my call, like a peacock's scream. That impotent scream of her cell made me feel certain that something was wrong. I went back out and drove over the county road outside of town to the sheriff's office. And lastly, this is a little later in the story. So earlier, before the story begins, another student had disappeared. And in this part of the story, they've just found her body. And Wendy was there when they found the body. This section mentions the deputy. This is a very rural area, so she's been working with a deputy to solve this case. And it mentions Scott. This is an old friend of hers that she's been reunited with, and Anne, who is her therapist. As it grew dark, I focused on my schoolwork. I felt I made good progress on it, investigating Henry James's mentally ill sister and the conditions of madhouses in the 19th century. I sat at the kitchen table with one light on, the rest of the house blurring into dusk. I contemplated those days when madness was almost a death sentence, when mental wards were rife with disease and despair. So many conditions were lumped together under that word, madness, a word that evoked fear and revulsion. Yet Poe and others had lent it a kind of romance as well. The mad artist, the mad poet, were icons of genius. Well, I did not feel like a genius. I heard a car but didn't pay attention to it stopping. When a loud knock thundered at the door, I jumped. I opened the door to Deputy Pelozzi and let him in. I went around and turned on the lights while he waited, standing in the living room with his pad. Once again, he wouldn't sit. He stood over me while I sank onto the couch. "We ID'd Cassandra Summers," he stated. "I heard it on the news," I said, eager to know whatever information he had. "Is there any link to Diana?" "That's what we're wondering." I felt vindicated, wishing Scott were there to hear that. "Did you know Cassandra?" the deputy asked. "No, I never really heard of her," he wrote in his pad, his pen scratching like Anne's. "You were never in a class with her?" "No, I think she was, the news said biology, and it was before I was here." "Where did you live before you came here?" It seemed strange. "Outside Utica." "Do you have friends who knew Cassandra?" "I don't think so, not as far as I know." "Cassandra went to Utica College." I started to feel weird. "I heard that too. Scott and I had met there, but we wouldn't have been there at the same time as Cassandra, but actually it could have been." He looked like he was deciding what to ask next. "I really don't know anything," I said, my voice weakening. I reached to turn on another lamp, and the bulb blew, the flare blinding me for a moment. He didn't blink. "I'm wondering why you asked me about her the first day you came to me." That was it. It was true, I had asked. "Well, my roommate was gone, and I heard once that a while ago a young woman disappeared. It only made sense to wonder." As he paused regarding me, I raised my voice. "It only made sense." His face was impassive, but he closed his pad. "Please don't upset yourself. We're just following every possible lead." He turned to go, and I was glad to walk him out. At the door, his look fixed on me. Drawing himself up with feet planted, he said, "Right now, we just try to make connections. You asked about Cassandra. You were there when we found her. Diana was your roommate. So far, you're the only connection we have." When he left, I collapsed at the table, my knees shaking. So those are some passages from the book. And I meant to also mention that even though I was inspired by my own experience, I found as I worked on the book that the more I pulled away from my own experience, the more I fictionalized it, the more I focused on it as a work of fiction, the more the book improved and really took shape as I let it really become a more fictional story. So we have some questions. Let's see.
Oh, I see one for you, Amy.
Okay, why don't you ask me that one?
Okay. How long did it take to write your novel?
Well, what happened was, as it was rejected over the years, I kept revising it. So it was that 17-year period that I was trying to sell it, that it took to write it. And of course, I wasn't working on it every day. It wasn't like a daily for 17 years, but I was working on it that whole time. And it also actually did change a lot in the editing process after it was accepted. Not so much that it changed a lot, but I continued to add to the book while it was being edited. I added about 7,000 more words in that editing process. So that was additional. So the whole 17 years was when I was working on the book. Here's a question for Joan. What do you think is the largest inspiration for your poetry?
Well, what inspires me to write really is reading other poets' work. Reading poetry inspires me to write poetry. Of course, the subject matter for poetry comes from life, but I don't know if I would feel moved to write without my fellow poets. They're so inspiring. I compare it to, like, if you're going to a party, say, and then you're approaching the house and you hear the music coming from within, and immediately you start to feel like you want to dance, and it's because you're hearing the music and the rhythms. And the same with poetry. When I hear the music of poetry, it makes me want to write poetry as well.
So there's a question, maybe it's for both of us. Do you have advice for people who are just starting their writing journey? I just started writing these past few months and I'm really enjoying myself. Well, I think Joan should take this because you're actually an English professor and you work with a lot of beginning writers and you mentor them, I'm sure. And what do you think for advice for beginning writers?
Well, as the person asking the question already mentioned, enjoying yourself, I think that's pretty critical. It should not feel like a chore. And then to read a lot and enjoy what you're reading. I tell my students that reading really wonderful stories and poems are really the best teacher. And then when you get to a point where you feel like you might want to share it with others, then do that and hear what how they respond to what you're writing. What do you wish more people wrote poetry and mysteries about? Wow, that's an interesting question. We live in a time, a really wonderful time, where we're not being censored. And so to write about what's real, at least with poetry, to really go for the gut and write about what's super important to you in a language that feels authentic. Amy, I don't know what you would say, but you're a playwright, Amy. So
yeah, I'm also a playwright.
Write a mystery, you write plays.
I think in terms of mysteries, I will say one thing. You know, there's this whole tradition of the cozy mystery, and there are certain requirements for the cozy mystery. Usually, like the victim should, at least in the past, the victim would be someone who isn't too sympathetic so that no one minds that they've been killed. That used to be sort of a requirement for cozy mysteries. And one thing that really disturbs me about that genre is the lack of the death having an impact on anyone. You know, it's cozy, so no one's disturbed by the fact that this person has been murdered. And I think that's something that disturbs me about a lot of mysteries. I think that I would like to see mysteries where there really is an impact, or someone mourning or being sad that this person was murdered. And that might be changing. I haven't actually read many recent mysteries, so this might be different from it was in the 50s with Agatha Christie and all that. But that's something I would consider.
If we can give some the audience maybe another second or two to decide if they have any more questions. But I have one of my own that I quite enjoy asking writers. When you are stuck on whatever you're writing, if indeed you believe that getting stuck is possible, What is it that you do to unstick yourself? How do you fix writer's block, I guess?
Amy, I'll let you take that one first.
I don't get a lot of writer's block. One thing I do when I'm working on a project, I make a lot of notes. I don't just sit down and try to write a chapter. I do a lot of pre-writing. I make extensive notes of anything I'm going to write before I sit down to try to write it. And I write by hand, and ideas start flowing as I make these handwritten notes. So that's one of the things I do. Oh, someone's asking who the portrait is on the wall behind me. Okay, that's Orson Welles from a photo shoot he did, I believe, with Cecil Beaton. And I was always a big Welles fan growing up. When I was young, I actually wanted to be a movie director. And now I'm primarily a playwright, as well as having this novel published. And I actually wrote a play about Orson Welles, about a real life meeting that took place in 1940 with him and H.G. Wells. They actually met 2 years after the famous War of the Worlds radio broadcast. So I wrote a play about my version of what happened when they met. And I just wanted some kind of big poster in that spot, and that worked out. I liked that one.
Wow.
For me,
oh, sorry, go for it.
Just for me with writer's block, I just start reading my favorite poets, and that usually helps.
And then if I might be selfish one more time, could I ask the two of you how you got into your respective fields of writing? And for Amy, you can go for either mysteries or playwright. Although I will confess, I would love to hear how you got into playwriting. It feels kind of uncommon to me.
Well, I actually started college in theater, and then got away from it when I was living in this rural area where there weren't any theaters around me, and didn't come back to it until I moved to Chicago. It's funny that, Joan and I were both writers, we're sisters, but there's no competition because we're in completely different fields. And I don't know, I wasn't as drawn to poetry, and I've always been interested in writing for performance, either plays or screenplays. And I wrote the novel more in the hopes that I could make a little money from it, because playwriting doesn't really pay. Very, very few people make any kind of living as a playwright. And also, I just wanted to tell that story so badly. So I don't mean to dismiss the importance of that novel. And I actually have another novel coming out next year, a historical novel about monks creating the Book of Kells in 800 AD. So I have kind of wide-ranging interests. I can't really explain what drew me, especially to playwriting. It's sometimes the things that make the deepest impression on me are the things I can't put into words, even though I'm a writer. And I can't put into words why I love playwriting, but it just calls to me. And I could say also that disorder changed significantly when I changed it from third person to first person. It got all these rejections when it was in third person. And when I changed to the first person, it became more like I was writing a play, because it became like a monologue. And that made all the difference for my fiction in general. Now, when I try to write fiction, I always try to do it in first person, because it just felt so much more natural and flowed in a way that it hadn't before.
I want to add that Amy writes good poetry, but I think the key, and I've written a few stories and I think they're okay. But I think the key is what draws you, and whether you feel drawn to writing a poem, or feel drawn to writing something that's fictional, and that's very mysterious. Yeah.
And I would say, for me, it starts with having a story I want to tell. It's not so much that, oh, I want to write a play today, or, oh, I want to write a novel today. Is that there's this story that's burning in me that I must tell this story. And that's where everything starts.
Wow. I mean, well, thank you for letting me be selfish. I was very curious. um, I guess it seems like the audience is tapped out of questions now. So unless the two of you have anything else you'd love to discuss or talk about, we can wrap up. Unless there is something you'd like to chat about.
No, I just like to thank everyone again for being here, and it was fun reading, sharing this with Amy, and seeing the chat here. I saw some people I recognize, so very thankful.
I want to thank everyone too, and thank Book Passage for putting this together. Really appreciate it.
We were absolutely delighted to do so. One last reminder for the good people at home and for the people watching on the VOD afterwards. The books today are A Slight Thing, Happiness, and also Disorder. You can find both of them at bookpassage.com. We will ship it to your house just like any other online retailer. Yes, including that one. And if you're outside the United States, the process is a bit more complicated, but if you give us a call over at Book Passage, you can find our number online. We'll figure out a way to get it to your house if you so desire. But also, although we appreciate you supporting us, remember to support your local independent bookstore. Okay, we love the support from all over the world, but there are lots of indies all over the country. We're happy when you support them too. Okay, we see them at the meetings, and they thank us for sending people their way. So that's what it is. One last time, thank you, Amy and Joan, for coming out and having such an excellent discussion. And thank you for the audience for your questions. They've been very lovely, and for your comments. I've been sharing them as well. And it was very good to see you all. Thank you one last time. All right, goodbye, everybody. See you in the next one.